with high-powered cars parked on the driveway. It was the chief executive lifestyle, funded by an unrelenting but sophisticated campaign of organised crime, which Mr. Slade orchestrated over many years. Police believe he headed a tight-knit gang of men, mainly long-term friends, whom he knew well and trusted implicitly. The organisation's inner ring involved no more than 6 members, possibly as few as 2. But Mr. Slade is also suspected of overseeing specific criminal divisions thought to be behind armed robberies and drugs offences. It was a network so efficient that Mr. Slade was able to move from Leeds to Spain in the early 2000s and run his operation from there. He was settled there for a couple of years, a police source said, but that didn't prevent him from coming back to Britain to do what he needed to do. Mr. Slade returned to Britain in late 2005 or early 2006 and initially lived in Harrogate, where his children were enrolled in independent schools, charging fees of more than £10,000 a year. He later moved to Leeds and bought a property in Sandmoor Drive, Al Woodley, identified as Yorkshire's most expensive street in 2007, which estimated an average house price at more than £1 million. He indulged in high-performance cars. He owned a Porsche Cayenne, a Bentley Arnage, and a Lincoln Navigator. Among Mr. Slade's subordinates, Michael Baxter drove a Range Rover and 2 Mercedes, and James Hudson owned a Volkswagen Passat and an Audi. But Richard Pearman, who lived in Swarcliffe, Leeds, did not even own a car when he was arrested. Mr. Slade's control of the operation became so regimented that it led to discontent amongst the lower-ranking gang members. Unaware that their conversations were being bugged by police, Mr. Pearman and Mr. Baxter once had a disgruntled discussion about how Mr. Slade was receiving a larger share of the group's ill-gotten gains than they were. Mr. Slade's extravagance drew a veil over a murky past. His convictions for grievous bodily harm as a teenager and his family connections to some of West Yorkshire's most notorious underworld figures. He is the nephew of Frank Burley, another man known to the police who operates in Leeds, and a cousin of Frank Burley Jr., also known as Frank Gatt. Mr. Burley Jr. died in mysterious circumstances from a single bullet to the head in Meanwood, Leeds in 2000, 6 months after he was freed from prison for his part in a £147,000 shotgun raid on a jewellery shop. The coroner recorded a verdict of unlawful killing after hearing that Mr. Burley Jr., who was 34, who was wearing a balaclava, could have been killed by a masked accomplice. Detectives hope Mr. Slade's conviction will help unravel other unsolved cases. These include the execution style of one of Mr. Burley Jr.'s associates, Mark McCall, in 2003 in a gin-out in Pudsey. Mr. McCall's criminal record included convictions for GBH, wounding, and making a false statement to obtain a false passport. And in 1995, he was one of 4 men acquitted of conspiring to murder another underworld figure, Clifton Jr. Bryant of Chapeltown, Leeds. Mr. McCall's murder and Mr. Burley Jr.'s killing were 2 of several shootings within a short period as gang violence escalated in Leeds in the early 2000s. After one of Mr. McCall's friends, David Clark, died in 2005, Mr. Slade was arrested but never charged. Mr. Clark, a 36-year-old father of 3, known to have moved in criminal circles, was shot in the mouth at his brother-in-law's house in Moortown, Leeds. The police inquiry concluded that the death was accidental and the coroner recorded an open verdict, but the circumstances of this and other apparently gang-related shootings remain unclear. There is no doubt that the criminal fraternity will have been following this case because Mr. Slade is regarded as untouchable, a police source said. Now that the police have successfully prosecuted this untouchable, they will be wondering who's next. We never closed the book on undetected crimes. The police finally arrested Dennis Slade after a plot to kill another criminal backfired, bringing officers to the scene. It is now believed that Mr. Slade had been planning for several days for someone to shoot his intended victim before the final incident on March 4, 2008. But at the time, the gang's sudden interest in the East Park area of Leeds was thought to be in a security depot. Robert Smith QC prosecuting told the jury that police believe his target was probably Ralph Roberts. He also had a criminal record. The jury was told not a reason why Mr. Slade might want him dead, but after the case, an officer said it wasn't really a personal problem, it was more of a financial problem. The gang were unaware that they were already under police surveillance when they went in a couple of cars to the area of Dalwich Crescent, where a car was attacked with a baseball bat. At 7:40 PM, a resident was sitting in his living room when he suddenly heard noises outside. When he went out to investigate, he found the windshield and some side windows of a Vauxhall Vectra had been deliberately smashed and the bodywork damaged. Mr. Smith told the jury that the man was not the intended target, but Mr. Roberts' partner lived nearby on York Road, with the rear of the property on Dulwich Crescent. It is believed that the car was attacked in an attempt to lure him out to investigate what was happening. However, the police, hearing the sound of smashed glass, thought it was gunfire and quickly moved in. Although some of those involved escaped in one car and on a motorbike, taking away a sawn-off shotgun, another car containing Mr. Slade, Richard Pearman and Michael Baxter was found nearby. The gang's operation was planned with care, involving use of not only vehicles, but also sophisticated technical equipment capable of trapping the movements of intended victims, said Mr. Smith. Mr. Slade also tried to dispose of a tracking device he had made himself, which he had probably intended to put on the target's car if the plan did not succeed that night. An earlier attempt had already failed when the gun jammed at the critical moment. In the event, no one was injured. One of the cars involved was later found burnt out. Even as a teenager, Dennis Patrick Slade was described by Judge Paul Hoffman as a callous, dangerous and determined young criminal. He was just 18 when a judge first sentenced him after hearing how Mr. Slade had left a woman seriously injured when he tried to stop him from taking her family's car from outside their home in Swillington's Leeds in 1992. G. Moses suffered 5 separate fractures of the skull and was put on life support machine after she and her husband Ronnie were thrown out of their Nissan sports car as Mr. Slade drove away with the couple on the bonnet. The judge commended the law because it allowed him to only pass a 12-month sentence in the Young Offenders Institution on Mr. Slade because he was only 17 when convicted of the offences. He had already spent 7.5 months in custody on remand, so the sentence at Leeds Crown Court in October 1993 meant his immediate release. The judge told him then, "If I had my way, I'd be sending you away for 7 or 8 years, because that's the sort of sentence you richly deserve." Mr. Slade had admitted causing GBH to Mrs. Moses, 3 charges of taking vehicles without consent, escaping from custody, conspiracy to burgle, handling stolen goods, and using a false instrument to obtain a passport. Following an appearance at Leeds Youth Court, Mr. Slade was being taken back to jail handcuffed to a policeman when 2 men helped him escape, cutting the cuffs with bolt cutters. He committed further car crimes and burglaries before he was rearrested months later at Newcastle Airport with a fake passport. The judge said, having caused serious harm to Mrs. Moses by his wicked, callous driving, while on the run, he had gone on to commit more serious crimes in the big league. Little did he know how true his words would be. Armed police formed a ring of steel around Dennis Slade for months to prevent him from escaping from a massive security operation thought to have cost millions of pounds. Mr. Slade travelled daily between Wakefield's maximum security prison and Leeds Crown Court in an armoured van surrounded by cars and motorcycles and surveyed from above by a police helicopter. The operation took different routes each day, and motorcycle officers held up traffic to allow it to sweep past, causing disruption and leaving passers-by wondering what was going on. Once Mr. Slade was inside the court's complex, armed police were positioned at the doors of the trial courtroom and elsewhere in the building. Metal detectors were also erected outside the courtroom. The tight security was ordered because Mr. Slade had escaped from custody in 1992 as a teenager. West Yorkshire police refused to disclose the security costs, but Northumbria police revealed in 2002 in a 12-week trial heard at Leeds under the similar conditions, it had cost taxpayers millions. A West Yorkshire police spokesman confirmed that Mr. Slade's investigation was right up there alongside the force's largest cases in the last 20 years. It was the early morning of March 8, 2006, and the duo of Noel Newby and Charles Smithhurst was set for another routine transfer of funds in their Securitas van. Travelling from Merseyside to their depot near Warrington, they followed the same route they had made countless times before, but this day was different. Unbeknownst to them, it was the day they would encounter the Slade Gang. The gang was known for its meticulously planned and audacious operations, and this day was to be no exception. As Mr. Newby and Mr. Smithhurst left the M6 highway, they came onto a junction where they found themselves behind a Volvo flatback lorry loader. It was an ordinary sight, but what they didn't know was that they had driven into a meticulously planned trap set by the infamous Slade Gang. With the loader strategically positioned to prevent them from moving forward, the van was suddenly hit from behind with a powerful force. The loader's arms attached to the tractor slammed into the rear door of the security van. A violent intrusion allowed partial access into the secured van, offering the Slade Gang the opportunity they had planned for meticulously. Inside the van was a whopping £1.4 million. With the van compromised and the crew caught off guard, the robbers managed to extract just over £1 million before making their getaway in a stolen car. Their operation was executed with ruthless precision and had netted them a small fortune, setting off one of the most intense manhunts of the year. Witnesses reported seeing the gang transfer bags from the Volvo car into an Audi estate about a mile away from the scene of the crime. Despite their attempts to burn the Volvo and remove evidence, the operation was only partially successful. The Volvo had been stolen 10 months earlier in Leeds and had only done a scant 300 miles in the interim, providing investigators with their first significant lead. Adding to the intrigue, the loader and the tractor used in the raid were also stolen. These vehicles were not randomly chosen. They were stolen to order from Wilberforce near York, specifically for this operation. In a testament to the gang's meticulous planning, the width of the tractor's arms corresponded exactly with the width of the door on the security van. The Slade Gang had made their mark in a dramatic and unforgettable fashion. In the aftermath, they had left behind a shaken crew, a damaged security van, and the beginnings of a trail for investigators to follow. The Securitas robbery would go down in criminal law as a testament to the audacity and meticulous planning of the Slade Gang, kicking off a manhunt that would span years and cross country lines. Almost 2 years after the notorious Securitas van robbery, the Slade Gang set their sights on a new target, a Sainsbury supermarket in West Yorkshire. They had hatched a daring plan to rob the supermarket of £500,000. An audacious plot that, if successful, would add a significant amount to their ill-gotten fortune. On the evening of January 29, 2008, Suzanne Pease, an administrative manager of the store located in Colton Retail Park in Leeds, was cleaning paperwork in a security area. The location was strategically chosen. It housed the supermarket safes and a purpose-built room where the money was delivered for staff to refill the ATMs. Suddenly, the silence of the night was shattered by an unexpected sound of drilling. Intrigued and alarmed, Miss Pease went to investigate, only to hear the unsettling sound of footsteps in the roof space above her. Fearful for her safety and realising something was amiss, she immediately alerted the police. The criminals had fled by the time the police arrived, but they had left behind signs of their aborted heist. There was damage to the roof and abandoned equipment, including a set of ladders, hinting to their audacious plan. They intended to gain access to the secure cash room through the roof and the adjacent electrical room, lying in wait to strike when staff were busy reloading the ATMs. Unbeknownst to the officers first responding to the scene, those behind this plot were already under extensive police scrutiny. Dennis Slade and his closest associates had been under surveillance by undercover officers for months. The surveillance operation showed the gang frequently scouting out potential targets across West and North Yorkshire, with a white Toyota van linked to the gang often spotted near the Sainsbury store. The covert tracking device in the Toyota van revealed a busy itinerary for January 10, 2008, just 2 weeks before the failed supermarket heist. In just one day, the van had visited numerous towns and cities, raising suspicions of a major operation in the works. However, despite their meticulous planning, the Slade Gang was foiled in their Sainsbury's plot thanks to an alert Suzanne P. Her timely action resulted in the plan's failure and offered police further insights into the gang's audacious operation. Despite facing setbacks, the Slade Gang remained undeterred in their pursuit of ill-gotten gains. Their next target was a seemingly innocuous post office in Leeds. The events that unfolded on December 12, 2007 transformed an ordinary day into a scene straight out of a crime thriller. Beverly Robinson, the assistant branch manager at Crossgates Post Office, and 7 other staff members were engrossed in a stock take after closing hours when chaos ensued. Without warning, a massive digger accelerated from the opposite side of the road, its massive telescopic arm breaching the post office wall. If it weren't for her split-second decision to move away from the point of impact, Miss Robinson might have been fatally injured. Instead, she was left shaken, watching in disbelief as rubble replaced the place she had been standing just moments before. Emerging from a cloud of dust were 2 figures, the driver of the digger and his accomplice, both dressed in black. Upon breaching the wall, they issued threats demanding money. In their haste, they managed only to seize 2 security boxes containing stamps, blissfully unaware of the £50,000 in the main safe. Fleeing the scene in a stolen Ford Focus, the robbers believed they had executed a successful heist, but the stolen car, discovered in a garage in Moortown, Leeds, would serve as another breadcrumb leading back to Dennis Slade. The Ford Focus had only been stolen 5 days prior from a driveway in Cottingley, Leeds. The garage where it was found was rented by an associate of Dennis Slade, further implicating him in the robbery. In a tactic reminiscent of the Securitas van robbery, the heavy equipment used in the raid was stolen. The digger was taken from a building site on Sandmore Drive, just around the corner from Mr. Slade's residence. This raid not only exposed the Slade Gang's brazen disregard for the law and order, but also highlighted their audacious tactics and detailed planning. Yet the evidentiary trail they were leaving behind was gradually closing the net around them. The puzzle pieces were coming together slowly, but surely, pointing to the notorious criminal Dennis Slade. Mansoor Mahmood Hussain, fondly known as Manni, was a successful businessman running a property empire worth more than £10 million. His opulent lifestyle and amicable personality were a stark contrast to his ties to one of the most notorious criminals in the UK, Dennis Slade. This connection would soon bring the downfall of his seemingly untouchable empire. Mr. Hussain was more than an acquaintance to Mr. Slade. After Mr. Slade's conspiracy to murder conviction was quashed, he found refuge in Mr. Hussain's multiple luxury properties, living rent-free. Mr. Hussain's association with Mr. Slade was not limited to providing him with accommodations. There were whispers in the underground of numerous joint ventures, hinting at a deeper involvement in Mr. Slade's illicit activities. It was only a matter of time before Mr. Hussain's ties to the underworld attracted the attention of the police. The very properties he lent to Mr. Slade became the focus of a wide-ranging investigation. All of Mr. Hussain's assets, including his business ventures, were scrutinized, revealing a web of suspicious transactions and dubious sources of income. The investigation unveiled that Mr. Hussain's legitimate business empire was a facade, a front for money laundering and other illegal activities. As the noose of the police tightened around him, the vast wealth and influential connections he had amassed over the years offered little protection. The consequences of his association with Mr. Slade were severe, leading to the collapse of his empire and tarnishing his reputation irreversibly. The chapter of Hussain's downfall serves as a warning to others enticed by the allure of easy wealth through association with the criminal underworld. It echoes the adage that crime does not pay, and those who seek to benefit from it will eventually face their day of reckoning. Following his release from prison, Dennis Slade, a criminal once categorised as a Premier League offender, returned to society, albeit under strict conditions. The authorities, believing that Mr. Slade had made a significant progress through his rehabilitation, decided to grant him conditional freedom. This decision was not made lightly. Mr. Slade had demonstrated apparent reform by successfully completing courses designed to address his offending behaviour. However, old habits die hard, and Mr. Slade found it difficult to completely disassociate himself from his former life. He maintained contact with his old associates, particularly Mr. Pearman and Mr. Baxter, both integral parts of his previous criminal endeavours. The first few months of freedom saw Mr. Slade living a relatively quiet life, taking strides to integrate himself back into society. But beneath the seemingly calm surface, the former crime boss was meticulously planning his return to the criminal underworld. The trio began meeting in secret, plotting audacious heists reminiscent of their past exploits. Their first act, following Mr. Slade's release, was a daring daylight burglary of a high-end jewellery store. The carefully orchestrated operation, coupled with the audacity of the act, signalled to the law enforcement that Mr. Slade was back in action. Despite the subsequent investigations, the evidence was not enough to pin the crime on Mr. Slade and his associates. Yet the crime world had changed during Mr. Slade's incarceration. Surveillance was more pervasive, law enforcement techniques were more advanced, and the consequences of getting caught were higher than ever. The return to his old ways marked the beginning of Mr. Slade's slow decline, setting up the stage for the inevitable fall of the infamous Slade Gang. November of the year following Mr. Slade's release brought a blow to the newly reformed Slade Gang. The UK law enforcement seized more than £250,000 from Mr. Slade under the Proceeds of Crime Act. This legislation, introduced in 2002, allowed authorities to recover assets obtained through criminal activity. The Proceeds of Crime Act served as a potent tool for authorities seeking to cripple the financial strengths of criminals like Mr. Slade. Following an intense investigation, law enforcement successfully proved that a significant portion of Mr. Slade's assets were proceeds from his numerous criminal activities. Consequently, the court ordered the confiscation of Mr. Slade's property and assets, effectively stripping him of his wealth. Simultaneously, the authorities turned their attention to Maxine Valentine, Mr. Slade's former partner. Miss Valentine had enjoyed a lavish lifestyle funded by ill-gotten gains of Mr. Slade's criminal endeavours. Despite claiming ignorance about the source of Mr. Slade's wealth, the authorities managed to demonstrate that Miss Valentine had benefited significantly from the proceeds of Mr. Slade's criminal activities. Using the Proceeds of Crime Act, they confiscated her assets as well. This double blow was a significant setback for the Slade Gang. Not only had they lost a considerable amount of their criminal wealth, but it also brought additional unwanted attention from the police. The financial blow, combined with the increased scrutiny from the police, marked a significant turning point in the history of the Slade Gang. They were forced to become even more cautious in their actions, marking the beginning of their decline and eventually leading to their downfall. Despite the audacious heights and apparent invincibility, the Slade Gang's downfall was inevitable. The double blow dealt by the Proceeds of Crime Act was just the beginning of the end. The increasing pressure from police agencies, combined with the crippling financial losses, were beginning to take a toll on the gang. Undercover operations were launched to infiltrate the group, and information about their activities began to leak. The once tight-knit gang started to crumble under the pressure, with trust within the group deteriorating. Members of the gang who were less loyal started to turn against Mr. Slade, providing crucial information to the authorities. In an unprecedented operation involving multiple police forces, the Slade Gang was concerned. Dennis Slade, the charismatic leader of the gang, was captured in a dramatic showdown. His associates, Mr. Pearman and Mr. Baxter, amongst others, were apprehended in a series of coordinated raids across the country. Described as callous, dangerous and ruthless, the infamous trio, Dennis Slade, Richard Pearman and Michael Baxter, finally saw their reign of criminal exploits come to an abrupt end. Their trial, held in August under high security at Leeds Crown Court, was the culmination of a lengthy investigation into their daring crimes, revealing a sordid history of robbery, conspiracy to murder, arson, criminal damage and handling stolen property. Their key crimes were recounted in court, each painting a chilling picture of their audacious tactics and ruthless nature. These included a high-profile robbery of the security vans in Woolston, Warrington in 2006, using a digger to ram raid a post office in Leeds in 2007, and conspiring to rob a cash machine at Sainsbury's supermarket in Leeds. Despite the weight of the evidence against them, the men were steadfast in their denial of the charges. Judge Paul Hoffman, presiding over the case, described Mr. Slade as the instigator and architect of the crime. Mr. Pearman and Mr. Baxter were characterised as his loyal henchmen and followers in crime. Judge Hoffman stated, "You three were an inseparable trio of hardcore criminal gang members. It's plain all three of you are dedicated to serious crime. I conclude all three of you are very callous, dangerous and ruthless men, particularly when you act as a gang." Mr. Slade, the ringleader of the gang, who had lived a life of luxury with his wife and 5 children in an opulent property in Woodley, Leeds, was hit hardest by the judgment. Having 9 convictions for 64 offences, his first being when he was just 14 years old, Mr. Slade was handed a life sentence. He was told he would serve a minimum of 19 years and 206 and a half days. His cohorts, Mr. Pearman and Mr. Baxter, also received life sentences with minimum terms of 17 years and 206 and a half days. As he was escorted from the courtroom, Mr. Slade, remaining defiant, exclaimed, "It would have been nice to get a fair trial. We'll see what the Court of Appeal says." Alongside the life sentence, Mr. Slade was handed a serious crime prevention order, banning him from using the internet whilst in prison. The 3 men were told they would remain unlicensed for the rest of their lives, effectively meaning they would be monitored and would be recalled to prison if they breached the conditions of their release. Their trial was one of the most sensational in recent history. The public was captivated by the audacity of the gang's crimes and their dramatic capture. The evidence against the gang was overwhelming, resulting in substantial sentences for Mr. Slade and his accomplices. The once feared Slade Gang was no more. The fall of the Slade Gang served as a stark reminder to the temporary nature of wealth obtained through criminal activities. Their story, whilst filled with audacious acts of seeming invincibility, ended up in imprisonment and loss. It showed that no matter how long it takes, justice does eventually catch up, and thus the reign of the infamous Slade Gang came to an end. The streets were safer, and the public could breathe a sigh of relief. Their tale serves as a reminder of the power of law enforcement and the inevitability of justice, no matter how cunning the criminals might be.